Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about printing here today. More specifically about Prince, the product that Michael and his colleagues in Australia have been developing. My name is Håkon Wium Lie. I'll start by saying a few words about CSS and how we came to use CSS and HTML in the printing world. Then Michael will go through some of the technicalities. There's probably a lot of technical people in the audience. We're going to go through some of the issues that you get when you try to do printing from the web. And then I'm going to run some demos at the end again. CSS sort of has been part of my life for 15 years now. In 1994, I first proposed the concept of CSS. I was then working at CERN with Tim Berners-Lee there, and he'd come up with HTML, and it was wonderful, and everyone loved it, except authors who wanted to be able to style their documents and say something about fonts and colors. And HTML wasn't meant to do that, and we didn't really want to turn HTML into a formatting language. So we said, you know, we're going to do style sheets on the side here. They're going to live next to HTML and determine the styling for HTML. And this was the initial proposal from 1994, and printing was actually part of that. We had the concept of media types, so you can do style sheets for speech, for screens, for printing, etc. Now, it took us a few years to get from this initial proposal and to a recommendation, which is W3C's name for a standard. In 1996, the first CSS standard was there. And in 1998 came CSS2, which added the concept of media-specific style sheet, which allows you to write a print-specific style sheet, for example. So from then on, you could really do printing. And we've continued this work in specifications to add features that are needed in printing, but not necessarily on the screen. And we have two specifications being worked on, CSS3 for page media and CSS3 generated content for page media. And you'll be seeing lots of examples today about what kind of functionality is in those specifications. The reason I came to get to know Michael and his company was when Bert Bos and myself, Bert Bos is the co-author of the initial CSS specifications. We have a book. We wrote a book about CSS. And the first edition of that book was written in Microsoft Word, I think. And the second edition was written in FrameMaker. And for the third edition, which we started working on in 2003, we said, hey, we're going to write this book in HTML and CSS. We're going to see if these things, what we're preaching here, does it really work? And if it doesn't work, what's stopping us? What is the functionality needed? So we sat down, and we quite easy to import the text from those FrameMaker and Word files, and the figures as well. And ideally, then you should have just been able to create an HTML page and press print in your browser. Unfortunately, browsers, and I have to say very unfortunately, since I also represent one browser maker, Opera Software, we're not very good at printing documents. Printing has never been the most important issue for users, so therefore it's been put off to the side a little, and browsers have never really gotten to doing printing well. So we couldn't use a browser to print this book. But we needed to provide a PDF to the publisher, to the printer. That's the accepted exchange formats for printed documents. So we had to have a HTML plus CSS to PDF converter. So we started looking, and we came across Michael and his colleagues and this wonderful product they were doing called Prince, which enabled us to actually do exactly what we wanted, to take our files. There were maybe 20. We had one HTML file, one for each chapter. Concatenate all of this information with figures, with CSS style sheets, and to get one PDF file out of there. And that's what we sent to the printer. And this is what we got back. Now, books is sort of the high end of the printing market, and I don't think that's representative for the kind of work that Prince is being used for, but it just shows, what is the possible? Is there a limit up there? And I think, books we can do. So that's good news. Another example I've been working on is PDF newspapers. A lot of newspapers have now started to publish PDF. This is The Guardian in Britain, who sort of every hour or so they publish a new version of this PDF newspapers that they want people to print out and take with them on their commute back on the subway in London or something. And we looked at the PDF they were generating, and we saw it was made by InDesign. And that means there's probably a guy sitting there, you know, with the layout and doing all the clicking, and you know, it's you can get quite beautiful documents out of there. But I think InDesign is going to be, you know these people who worked with lead in the old days, and then computers came and they were sort of sitting in the corner still doing lead for a while. I think InDesign is going to be like that. You're going to have that one InDesign guy in the corner, and they're probably going to have a union. But really, everything is going to come off the web. The web is going to be the master copy of all information, and you're going to press print, and you're going to get something out of there. And I think what you're going to get in the foreseeable future is PDF. I think PDF has established itself as the means of exchanging information when you want to print or archive something. So what we did here was to take their PDF document, which is on the right, and then I recreated a HTML document with CSS, and I used Prince to convert it into PDF again. And that's what you see on the left. And if you look very carefully, you'll see there are some minor differences between the two, but they're pretty much the same, which means The Guardian could have used the web as their master copy. They didn't need to go to an expensive InDesign human being. That's another high-end example. I'm going to point, you're going to select, just show briefly one more example before I let Michael continue, and that's my own PhD thesis, which of course was also written in HTML and CSS, and I had to adhere by the rules of the University of Oslo. They had certain requirements on especially the printed version of this, but I wanted to use again the same master copy. The same HTML files and the same CSS file should be used both for the on-screen version and for the printed version. So that's what I did, and there's the resulting document. The theme of my thesis is CSS. I said it's been part of my life. And here's the PDF version, which complies with the rules of the university. And we think there's lots of cases like this where authors want to write documents and they want to adhere by some style rules that have been put forward by others, and they just had to follow those rules. And it should be easy to do that. And you shouldn't have to import a template in Word and make all these manual changes yourself. It should be just print a button from the web. And on that note, I'm going to let Michael continue and talk more about the technicalities underlying this.
Thank you, Håkon. Right, so CSS, I'm assuming most of you have some idea of CSS, what it is, what it's used for, but just as a refresher, here is a really basic CSS rule used for setting heading styles, the H1 element being the main heading of a HTML document usually, and we want to set a font in the typical typesetting fashion. The syntax, it's bold 24-point Palatino and aligned to the center. Now you can imagine this kind of rule being in a corporate style sheet if you want to keep a consistent printout style for all your documents, and you have this rule and you can combine it with other style sheets because CSS rules cascade, that's the cascading, the C in CSS, and you can combine different style sheets and they will intelligently merge and the rules will all be applied to the document. So that's a simple rule and it applies to a HTML element. Now I'm not going to go into detail about CSS. There's thankfully plenty of tutorials on the web about how to use it, mostly for websites, of course. But what we're interested in is CSS for printing, something that still many people don't realize can be done, even though some of these features were in there, such as page breaking, in CSS2 dating back to 1998. Page breaking is usually, or pagination generally, is usually the first request people have. It's how to create page breaks where you want them and inhibit page breaks where you don't want them. I'm going to come back to this in a second, actually. And it's very, very simple. So we have two rules here, and again, this is pure CSS2, so you can do this since 1998, which is quite a long time. H2 is your second level heading, maybe your chapter headings, and you probably want to start them on a new page, a fresh page. And so we use the page break before property to say that we're always going to have a page break before a chapter level heading, so it starts at the beginning of a new page. That's handy. But then your section headings, you don't want to start those on a new page, they can occur anywhere. But what you do want to say is that they don't appear at the end of a page, the last thing of a page. I mean, it's bad form to start a new section with a heading at the bottom and no text following it, and then the text begins on the next page. That's ugly. So we say avoid breaking pages after a section heading. So Prince will then move the heading to the next page so that it starts immediately before its content. It just makes it easier for the reader. CSS3 also adds page break inside, where you can avoid splitting objects. For example, small tables that you want to keep together. You can make sure that it's displayed on one page in one piece. So it gives you some control over the way your document is paginated. Now, just to go back here, this is what we call the magic document. It's a contrived sample document that includes as many of the print-specific features of prints that we can find. And I'm going to be going through how some of these are implemented. You can just see some of the things like crop marks and cross marks for alignment. Now, it's a fairly high-end printing feature, but some of our customers are using it. I mean, they're doing batch jobs on industrial printers and things, and it's handy for them. They print on bigger pieces of paper, and it gets trimmed to the right size. Now, it's funny, actually, because when we first implemented crop marks, and we wanted to test it out, so we made the magic document. And Håkon had it printed. He sent it to the printer as a PDF file, and we got it back, and we looked at it. And the first thing we thought is, where are the crop marks? They'd disappeared. And of course, we asked the printer, and they had cropped them. I mean, they are crop marks, that's what they're for. They had trimmed it exactly where the crop marks were. So they worked perfectly, but it wasn't quite what we were expecting. Now, in fact, there's also metadata inside the PDF file giving the paper size that corresponds with the crop marks. And intelligent printers will look at that. So the actual visible crop marks are more for humans to double check. So a couple of things there. You can see that there's 2 columns of text. If you look closely, you can see a few things, a table of contents with page numbers, and we're going to talk about where those come from, and a few other things, CMYK colors and things, hyphenation. So we'll get into some of those. Now, once you've taken control of page breaking and pagination, you also want to know what is your page. I mean, how do you select your page? It's not an element in the document, but you want to apply properties to it. So CSS2 introduced the @page rule, which gives you a way to specify page properties like the page size and orientation and the margins around the page. And this is really a starting point for creating a page template. You know, what size paper are we working on? What are our margins? And later, what are our headers and footers? So this rule is fairly straightforward. We want a 2-centimeter margin on every side, and it's an A4 landscape page. Now, you can actually mix landscape and portrait pages. A common use of that is to have a document on portrait-oriented pages, and at the end, perhaps a landscape page for a large table that wouldn't fit on a portrait page. And this is where we get into headers and footers, which is where it gets interesting. When we defined the page margins, that created margin boxes. Every margin creates a margin box on the page that can contain content, either generated by the style sheet, as we see here. We've created a header with a fixed text, my document, that comes from the style sheet, and a footer with a running page number. It's using the page counter, so it'll just be page 1, page 2, page 3 as you go through the document. You can also get page 1 of n.
Can I ask a question? To what extent are you simply duplicating the template facilities in Word and InDesign FrameMaker? I mean, they all have this sort of stuff.
Word, Design, and FrameMaker are not part of the web. So obviously, we want to provide the features for headers and footers and things that people are accustomed to working with other systems. I mean, you might as well ask in what way is Word duplicating InDesign? Is InDesign duplicating Word? I think we can talk more about that later. I mean, this is an attempt to bring printing to the web so that web content can be printed out in a way that's consistent with printing tradition.
Okay, so you have a notation for expressing the things that they do through GUIs or whatnot.
Yeah,
yeah. Intended to be a sort of canonical text representation that you can embed in an HTML file or a nearby file.
Yes.
That is equivalent to all the stuff that those things do through their user interfaces.
I don't know about all the stuff that they do through their user interface. I mean, I haven't looked at every aspect of InDesign and seen if there's a CSS property for every one. No. But that's getting into...
Is that your goal?
Is that your goal? Well, generic typesetting systems that the human can go in and actually drag things around will always be able to do fairly arbitrary, complicated, random things. I mean, there's an 80% of documents of everything from book reports, invoices, articles, up to books, which a generic automatic typesetting system can handle fine, running off style sheets without human intervention, sort of going in and sort of actually clicking on something and saying, move this 2 pixels to the left. And that's really what we're targeting here. In the same way that the browser lays out pages without human intervention, right? It's not an image editor, it's not the GIMP, you don't have to go in and move it left and right. We want to do automatic typesetting. Yeah. So, if that's...
Sorry to bother you. Can you move the mic a little bit closer to you?
And just to add to that, I think you're right in pointing out these other products. They have a long tradition of typography. Printing has evolved over hundreds of years, and one has a certain features than one is used to, like headers and footers, like page numbers, etc. And I think we're all trying to implement this. InDesign and Word are doing it in a manual way, where you had to point and click and type. We are trying to do this in an automated fashion here by putting this text goes into a CSS style sheet that you can then apply to all the web documents.
Yeah.
But this is part of CSS already, right?
Yeah, this is part of CSS3.
Yeah.
Well, actually, CSS, CSS3.
CSS3 page media spec, yeah. And of course, you could build a GUI on top of it. I mean, it's easy to generate CSS from a GUI in the same way that you generate HTML for a GUI.
I mean, do you
Okay.
actually expect to have disk representation for every one of those features?
Well, I'll get back to you when I get back and check every one of those features. But we want to handle the sensible 80% that covers most documents, yeah. I mean, we are aiming to provide something that's going to be usable for a lot of things. Right. So it's also possible to take content from the document and move it to the headers and footers, which is quite handy. You can take chapter titles, so just text from the document and take it there. Or you can take whole elements like tables and put them in the headers and footers and repeat them. And there's control over where the headers and footers are displayed. You can disable them for the first page of the document or the first page of the chapter, which is a common use. You can also create duplex page layouts, and I've just sort of hinted at that at the bottom, where you have the two-page spread with a left and right page, intended for sort of being bound, and they usually have different margins on the left and right pages and different headers and footers. So there is support for that. And they're fairly flexible in what you can do. Now, we saw multi-column layout in the Magic document, and this is a rather exciting thing. It's being implemented in some of the browsers as well, some of the newer builds of Firefox. And it degrades nicely, of course, in the browser. If you don't have columns, it just displays in one column. Now, in print, columns, of course, have a long history, and they can be accessed in two ways. You can specify the number of columns, and it'll just divide up the space into that many columns. And you can do balanced columns where the height matches on all the columns, or latex-style columns where it fills each one in turn. There's lots of options. And you can just specify a column width. So you say, well, I don't know how much space there is, but I know how wide I want my columns to be, so just divide it up into columns of this width, and it does the best job it can. And you can put rules between the columns, have little lines, gaps between the columns. It's quite configurable. And yeah, that's out of the multi-column layout CSS3 module, which has achieved some implementation in other browsers as well as prints, which is good to see. Okay. Leaders and cross-references. Now, this is a print-specific thing. Leaders are those little dots, which is probably easier to show than tell. In the table of contents, the leader is the line of dots that leads your eye to the page cross-reference corresponding to that chapter. Now, of course, they can't be in the input document because you don't know how many dots you have to put there. So that's part of CSS-generated content. And it's easy to access that functionality. You just say, well, I want a leader, and put a dot there and repeat it to take up all the available space. So that's handy, it's neat. But cross-references are really the first form of hypertext. I mean, that's hypertext. You want an internal link in the document, see page 17. Or you can reference the title. You can see chapter 1, cascading style sheets on page 17. So regular internal links in the document can, using generated content, be written as cross-references with page numbers, section numbers, and titles.
Okay, but let's say you're viewing this document in a web browser.
If you're viewing in a web browser, that's fine. You can put this rule, and I've written it here. Here, I mean, we've said, after a link, put a leader and a cross-reference as target counter, so the value of the page counter at the element that the link points to. Now, Håkon mentioned media-specific style sheets. That's basically at media print, or in HTML, when you reference a style sheet, you can specify a media attribute, and that says only apply this style sheet if we're printing. And you've got media screen, and of course the default is media all, where you've got style rules that you want to apply in every situation. So it's quite easy to make documents, and Håkon's PhD thesis was an example of that, where it had a menu down the side that doesn't display in the printed version. It's quite easy to make documents where you can take advantage of print-specific features when printing, and web-specific features when on the web. I mean, maybe you want a little pop-up or some absolutely positioned floating thing when the user mouses over that can't be expressed in print, but does make sense on the screen. And you can have both of that with CSS. So, I mean, we see the web, as Håkon said, and we keep repeating, we see the web as being the way of distributing information in the world. I mean, it's the global information platform for humanity. And output devices, from laptops to phones to printers, should come from the web. And you shouldn't have to rewrite your document just because someone wants to print it. They should be able to print it and get high quality output from what you've written.
I have one question.
Oh, sorry.
You were just talking before about columns and layout and essentially being smart with H1s and H2s and where they're placed on pages. I used to do a lot of print setting, and one of the things that we always talked about were widows and orphans. Widows being a line of text that's very short, such as like right behind you, number 4, generated, that's a widow, where it basically has one word in an otherwise pretty long line length. And then orphans are like when that is essentially on another page. Can we account for those in CSS?
Yeah, there are two properties. I haven't got a slide for that actually, but there are two properties, widows and orphans, both of which take a number. Now, in the context of CSS, they actually both refer to lines. One is the number of lines that can appear orphaned on the next page. So if you have a single line of a paragraph, and one is the number of lines that can be widowed, possibly it's the other way around, at the end of the previous page. So if you begin a paragraph, but you only have room for one line of it. So I think by default we set it to 2 or 3, something like that. So we do support that. Now, you also mentioned the word widow, the generated. It's a bit unfortunate to have a line with a single word in it. Now, that comes down to a line breaking and justification. There's some algorithms we're working on. I mean, LaTeX has done this, where if it sees a single word at the end of a paragraph, it will say, oops, backtrack a little bit, maybe try to tighten up some of the earlier lines and move them back. Now, that's an algorithmic thing, and we've got to work on that. But yeah, I mean, we definitely are paying attention to those kind of issues because they are important. I mean, the browser should do those too, in my opinion.
Especially, I mean, because like with the place that it often comes up is, I work in user experience, but like with short lines of text that wrap like 2 lines. With internationalization, it's very difficult to actually have this come, because like this is like a great example of where it looks horrible, where essentially you have one line of text that wraps and has like 2 words on it. Whereas it, like, the fewer number of lines, the more important it is for them to have like a substantial weight of like, equal length. But thanks.
So yeah, I'm not sure if we will have any properties directly to control that. Maybe just a knob basically to control the quality. I mean, how hard should the algorithm work to make things look good? What's the tolerance for sort of sloppiness in the line breaking? But yeah, we do have widows and orphans on a line basis, and we definitely plan to add it on a word basis as well.
Could I just, now we're designing by committee here, how would you express this? Would you say the last line should always be 50% at least of the total line length?
I haven't thought through all the rules and everything.
Right.
It definitely is one of those things where the fewer the number of lines that it wraps,
Right.
the more important it is for them to be of equal length.
I think tech has standard sort of minimize
Right.
the least squares badness of the line variation and things like that.
Yeah,
So
you have to watch a little bit with internationalization issues
Right.
with that. But I think you can do it primarily algorithmically.
yeah,
And not, as you say, mostly maybe have a knob to control it, but not try
Yeah.
to do it very,
Yeah.
very specifically, because then you'll be in trouble.
yeah.
It doesn't need to be customized as much as it just needs to be handled well.
Yeah, we should be able to get to the point where we can handle most things well, and Bookmarks is a PDF-specific feature actually that doesn't show up when you print the document. But if you load a PDF file, it actually has a bookmark list down the side, a hierarchical, sort of a document map, an outline map, generated from the document. And there are CSS properties to control how that outline map is generated. And for HTML, of course, it works very nicely because the H1, H2, H3 heading elements just map to a nested bookmark level. So if you run prints on a HTML document, it will automatically generate an outline for the document that maps to the hierarchical structure of your document as expressed with these elements. But you can control that, and you can override the bookmark label. So if you want to, for handy navigation in long PDF documents, you can create your own bookmark labels and nesting and things like that. So more an issue when you're sending out documents that might not be printed. But there are some features that are PDF-specific rather than print-specific, like improving the quality of the generated PDF files, performing font subsetting to reduce the size of the generated PDF files, while still including the fonts that you've used so that you get accurate printouts when you send it to someone else. Footnotes are a great one. Footnotes are another sort of a primeval hypertext mechanism where there's something you want to say, but not right here. We'll just leave a note and we'll link to the bottom of the page. Now, it's fairly easy to get basic footnotes. As you see here, this is the syntax that's taken from generated content for page media, the CSS3 module, which includes a lot of these features. Now, I think we've got, yes, okay. So this is the bottom of the magic document where we do talk about footnotes, and we use some footnotes, and they show up in the footnotes area at the bottom of the page, which, like the margin boxes, can be styled independently if you feel like doing that, putting a border at the top or whatever you like. There's a fair bit of flexibility for footnotes as well, as there's a lot of different house styles for footnotes. What kind of counters do you use? Do you sort of reset the counter to 1 on every page? Or maybe you don't use numbers. Maybe you use the asterisk, dagger, double dagger, sort of sequence of symbols, and that can be supported as well with generated content. You can actually.
Can you have 2 levels of footnotes?
2 levels of footnotes. Sorry, the like 1, 2, 3, and then symbols as well, or?
Something like at the top of the text you have the original, say Shakespeare, and
yeah.
You have the bottom of the text you have some more, middle text is more commentary, and
Oh,
the way
okay.
bottom is more,
So you're having footnotes in the text and footnotes in the commentary as well?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I've never seen that. What I have seen is sometimes you'll get the symbol-style footnotes will be page notes,
Right.
and the numeric footnotes will be section notes.
End notes? Right.
Will be end notes.
Right. Yeah, well, that's definitely achievable, the end-note footnote combination. The mixed footnotes, I don't know. I need to look at that and think about the markup. Probably.
I've seen some horrendously complex footnote examples that I don't want to try to replicate, but the spec, it provides for 3 kinds of notes. It's footnotes, side notes, where you want to put it in the margin, and end notes. And I think with those 3, we can cover the more than 80. I think we can get up to 97% roughly. Right. There was another question.
Yeah.
Can you put footnotes into a single column?
Yeah, you can actually. We support column foot.
Sometimes you see columns where you have some footnotes here.
Yeah, we do support column footnotes actually because it was, fits in with the LaTeX style as well. And for Terry Pratchett readers, we support footnotes within footnotes. I don't know if there's any Terry Pratchett readers here, but he has a habit of footnoting his footnotes, and we wanted to support that usage. Now, there's a couple of other things there, actually. We've just snuck in an equation just because we can. It's not print specific, but I'll leave it there. And there's another example of cross-references where you have a link. Headers and footers are discussed on page 2, and cross-references are used to generate the table of contents, page 1. And again, you don't know the page numbers in advance. That's the whole point of automatic typesetting. You don't know the page size, you don't know the page numbers. And so Prince will fill in all the cross-references there.
Is it controllable, the footnote number between that, the text of the footnote?
Yes,
no space between
that should really have.
There should be more space there.
Yeah.
It's a simple
It is
setting.
controllable. You can actually, there are pseudo elements to select the footnote call and style it the way you want, select the footnote marker and style it the way you want, the footnote text and the footnote area. So there's actually quite a few controls you can get in, and you can set up the style the way you like it. And then once you've got it there, the markup for doing footnotes is usually really easy. It's usually just like span class footnote or something like that, and you just put it wherever you want a footnote. So yeah, you set it up the way you like and stick it somewhere, footnotes.css.
So can you have a footnote in the footnote section correspond to more than one place in the text?
Ooh, that could be a little bit tricky at the moment. We're getting Håkon details, yeah. I mean, this is the 80-20 thing, or the 97-3 division that we're talking about. Yeah, it is possible to invent arbitrary conventions, like, you know.
That actually occurs in grammar books.
Okay.
You'll see one on like 5 things, and then you see at the bottom one.
Right.
I was just thinking of what LaTeX provides.
Right.
What
Okay.
if you want to write, the PhD thesis.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think under GCPM there is a way to do that, where because you've got the links to external content, so you could have multiple links to the same piece of content, and then we could aggregate that into. Yeah. So actually, I'm going to say that's possible, even if it's not possible today, but it's certainly possible. So crop marks, really easy. Been there since 1998 in CSS2. We're the first people to implement it in a CSS user agent, to my knowledge, and of course we've tested it and it works, which is great. Actually, we've got some additional functionality with crop marks requested for some of our higher end printing customers of adjusting the bleed area and things like that, but that might be over the top for most users, but you can do it if you want to. So that's the magic document, and there's a few other things we haven't touched on. Image resolution. You can adjust the DPI of images. Yeah.
Just curious, is that smiley face actually HTML, or is that just curious if it passes ACID 2?
We do pass ACID 2. We were perhaps the 3rd user agent to do so, depending on whether you count Conquer and Safari as different user agents and various things. We're in the top 3 anyway. We did pass ACID 2. That there is not literally the ACID 2, I think, because the ACID 2 is rather fragile in how you can embed it, but that's our output from the ACID 2. And we're rather proud of that, and we do our best to make sure we don't break it. It's very important. We like it, yes. So it's the ACID 2, well, yes, we know who to blame for the ACID 2. He's sitting at the back. But yeah, and he's not listening either. So the ACID 2 is a rather fiddly example of HTML and CSS, but it's really just part of our commitment to supporting the standards to the fullest extent. I mean, they're there, they're standard, and we want to support them. Yeah. So yeah, I was just mentioning image resolution. People often have a high resolution 300 DPI images for print that they won't use on the web because they're too big. And the image resolution property is a little bit handy for adjusting those kind of things. And hyphenation, which you can almost make out here and there. We support hyphenation using the hyphenation dictionaries from OpenOffice, and you just enable it. You say, hey, I want automatic hyphenation for this. Use this hyphenation dictionary. By default, we just link to the English one at the moment, and it will enable hyphenation. And we're rather happy about that as well, because that's fairly a new thing for a web user agent to do hyphenation. But of course, it's another one of these printing features which has a long history in printing and typesetting world. So it's something that needs to be there. And we've got the eye candy of round borders for anyone working on Web 2.0, translucent mirrored round borders on their website, where you can do it.
Speaking of hyphenation, do you do the fancy German hyphenation?
Fancy German hyphenation. We'll get to that. Yeah, there are some language-specific hyphenation issues, and you have to chop characters or add characters. And, yeah, so that's more in the details, in the algorithms, really. I mean, the CSS, it gives you the control, the switch hyphenation. Yes, yeah, and after that, it's up to the implementation, the algorithms, the language support to do the best job as possible for the things it's doing. So we've got some examples of how Prince is actually used in some more dynamic applications, as these are all static PDFs that we've shown so far. But a lot of our customers are generating PDFs dynamically when you press a button in web applications. I mean, that's the most common use of Prince, really, on the server side, integrated with web applications. So Håkon's going to show some of those. Any further issues? Maybe we can leave the other things after. Yes?
Do you handle character sets other than Latin 1?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Do you handle all of Unicode 5?
We handle Unicode in the sense that we read it and we look for glyphs in the fonts. In practice, that means we do Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Cyrillic, Greek. Arabic and BiDi is something we're working on, and the Indian scripts are something we're working on because they require extra special case work. Yeah, but definitely we want to support the world's languages. That's, that would be fantastic. Well, we use the user's fonts. I mean, we scan for fonts. We say which fonts are on your system, and you can use those. And we don't just look for the fonts on the system. We now have the web to provide us with fonts.
I'm going to talk about how we can link to web fonts in a minute.
Yeah, that's quite exciting. So
I think there was one more question.
Are you going to be discussing the inverse of Prince going from PDFs to HTML and CSS?
No. No, you can do that. But because we see PDF as something that you print or you email to people or you archive, yeah, we see the web as the source format. There are tools for doing that, but not us.
Will one of you be comparing this to Adobe's web capture?
Web capture.
It turns HTML into PDF.
Does it do a good job?
I was hoping you would tell us.
Right. Well,
Well, it doesn't have all those features.
right. I mean, that's the thing. There are other tools that do HTML to PDF, but we haven't really found anything that is as focused on supporting the full, supporting the print and typesetting worlds and supporting it from the web and with CSS and web standards. Most of the tools like web capture, I think they're really just almost like taking screenshots of web pages and sticking them in not literally taking screenshots, okay, but I mean, the pagination is not always ideal. They don't support all the printing features. So we haven't really been paying them much attention, as most of the people that require printing from the web haven't been able to use them very effectively and come to use Prince instead, that we found. Yeah.
Okay, I have some demos to run.
Go for it.
I'm going to push you out here. Okay, so these demos are available. You can run them off the princexml.com site. These show how you can use Prince running on the server side and combine it with web applications. This is a fictional order form to buy fruit, and if you click on the apple here, you will add one more to the cart, and you can see the prices being computed dynamically as this happens, and we can do the same for the other fruits naturally, and we can type in the name of the person, the address, etc., and we can generate an invoice based on this information that has been generated in the web application. So what happens when I press Generate Invoice is that the data is sent to the server side. There's an instance of Prince running in a server somewhere, and we get back a PDF document that we can open in Acrobat or whatever, and here we see the page, which is something we think users will want to have for printing purposes, for archival purposes, etc. So basically here we've frozen one order of fruit into this PDF document. And we've chosen to use the same kind of visual image here, like the apples and pears, etc. But this could, of course, be very different, depending on what style sheet you are combining with the data on the server side. You can basically create anything you want from it. Another example is the menu generator. When we go and eat dinner at restaurants, we're always looking at, of course, the typography of the menu. That's the most important part. And there's terrible, I tell you, terrible menus out there. And we want to improve that. So we created this interactive menu generator where a restaurant could go in and type in the price of the dishes of the day and perhaps change the spelling of something if it doesn't work. Many is what we say in my native Norwegian. So I'm editing this, and I can make a few simple choices here to like choose between US letter and A4, and I can ask for a formal font instead of an informal font, and I press the generate, and it comes back again with a server generated menu, which uses here a formal style, you can see, and you can see it's the Norwegian spelling, and I changed the price to be 6. So here, a restaurant could go in every morning and change the text and do the things and have their favorite fonts, or if they one day want to be a little more hip and use an informal font, they can do that. Let's change it back so we get the spelling right for where we are, and we get another document back, and here we have sort of an informal font use, and this is very easy to do. The user here, I think it's important. The user doesn't have to make many choices. We can do some intelligent things for the user on the server side, and we can limit the choices the users have to do. When users use Word, they're presented to a gazillion number of options, and I don't think users want that. They want to do some, choose a template in the beginning, and thereafter it should be done fairly automatically. Of course, if there are specific requests, we need to handle that as well. So we could have added easily a way to select one specific font in this interaction, for example. Web fonts is what I'm going to be talking about next. I think fonts really are core to typography on the web, and we've had roughly 10 fonts on the web since 1995. When Microsoft started this project to develop what they call the core fonts for the web. It was a great program, actually. They said, we have typographers in-house. We're going to make these fonts available so that the web will improve in aesthetical value, and it will improve in interoperability, because these fonts were made available for others to run on other platforms as well. So Mac and Linux machine also have these 10 fonts available. And they're high quality, they're good. They work in small sizes, and I think more than 99% of the text we read on our computers, we use these fonts. They're good, but they're also kind of a little boring after 10 years. At least designers think so. So we'd like to add more fonts to the web. We'd like to have a way to link to fonts, because there's millions of fonts out there. I just did a search on this site called Font Freak. Compare it to, these are the fonts available on the user side. These are the 10 fonts we're using today. And these are the fonts available on Font Freak. There are 2,400 families available that can be linked to. That it's an untapped resource that hasn't been looked at seriously from a web perspective. And the only thing missing is a hyperlink. And we know how to do this. This was actually described in CSS2 from 1998, where you import a style sheet that has the ties between the family name and the URL, and from there you can just use the font families that this person, I'm using Ray Larrabee, he's a great font designer. I'm using his fonts here. And here are some samples. I'm not sure you would use his giant tigers for all your works. Your PhD dissertation might not come through if you choose this one, but there's so many to choose from. These are some of his fonts starting with G, and some of them are very beautiful as well. And we think this is going to really change the face of the web. So Prince has implemented this, and you saw this perhaps in the invitation here. This invitation is written in the ransom note School of Typography, where you choose many different fonts, but it shows the richness that's out there. All these fonts here are made by another great designer, Steffmann, Dieter Steffmann, a German, and they can be used freely off the web.
Freely. What's the legal status of all these fonts?
That's very important. These are freely available. He has made them available for anyone to use for any purpose on the web. So we have, with his permission, we have republished these fonts off the Prince XML site. Naturally, there are fonts that you cannot do that with. If you buy a font from Adobe or somebody else, a commercial vendor, you can't just publish them on the web. Just like you can't, if you buy stock photography from a site, you can't republish it. So you need to look at the license. But even with that, there are so many free fonts that the designers just are happy to see you use. Yeah?
Does your CSS agent do the caching of the font so that you don't overload the poor designer's website?
Yes, that's a good thing. This was shown here now. The invitation was done in Prince, but we can also show this in browsers. And for browsers, that's become very important. And I think what browsers will do is to treat them as a cached resource. And I'm going to show a browser that actually has added support for this. It's not Opera, I'm afraid. This is Safari, the nightly builds of Safari. I'm going to try to reload this document so that you see that it's being there. I did a reload, so it went out and fetched the fonts off the Prince XML site, and here I can now select the text. This is real text now, searchable, clickable, indexable text.
My follow-up question is that is there a way to specify checksum or some kind of security feature so that I know the font I'm downloading hasn't changed meantime? Last time I downloaded it looked good. Like this time,
right.
Well, it has a few extra bits that will take over my rendering engine.
Right. We haven't done that, but I don't think it's that big of a problem because these fonts aren't downloaded and installed on your system. They're only treated as a temporary resource. So they're treated just like images, right? So when the browser quits, you typically clean up the cache, and the next time you start, you will have to reload them. But they're not that big, really. It shouldn't be that much of a concern. A typical size of a font file is between 50 and 100K. So it's about the size of a photograph.
Okay. And third question is, if I do a copy and paste, so can I preserve the styling of the look and feel of the text I'm copying and pasting to some other application, preserving the font information, or is it too much?
Well, that will be up to the application. That's beyond the scope of the specification. Whether Safari will do that or not, I don't know. But here you see this. Here you see the same document, exactly the same document being showed in Safari, straight from HTML, and here a PDF. That has been generated by Prince.
So how many browsers support this so far?
So far, it's only Safari. Okay. We are working on it inside Opera as well. Okay. So much I can say, and we're obviously talking to everyone about it. We're trying to promote this. We think it's time after 10 years of
open type fonts.
Open.
Is it open type fonts?
Well, the fonts I've been using here are all TrueType fonts. TrueType is more widely supported on all platforms. For example, on my Ubuntu machine, I can use all the TrueType files. For some reason, not all the OpenType files work well. I think that might change with time so that we can get some of the wonderful ligatures and swash variants that we can find in OpenType.
We'll still get access to those because with a lot of the TTF, the OpenType with TrueType outlines. So we say TrueType can still have the OpenType tables there.
Yeah.
Just additional.
Yeah, and we're working on supporting those. So.
Yeah. For internationalization, it's important to be able to get to the stuff in the OpenType.
Yeah, right. I think internationalization is another key. I mean, we're talking mostly about this from a design perspective, but I think internationalization is very important here, where you can come with a small language that doesn't have the support of Microsoft Windows, and you can basically add dynamically new fonts to the web. As long as you have a point in Unicode, you can add support for new languages there.
Yeah, it gets a little bit tricky because actually Apple and Microsoft had two very different philosophies regarding them. And with OpenType, you have to pre-process the text if it's anything funny like Indic before you use an OpenType font. And so if you're dealing with a script that Microsoft didn't put in support for, or you're on an operating system where they didn't duplicate Microsoft support for script X, it won't work.
If you're using Uniscribe.
Yeah, if you're using Uniscribe, or well, I mean, you have to duplicate what OpenType fonts for that script will expect Microsoft to do.
To have done, yeah.
Okay. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't do them, but it does take some work.
Yeah.
One make with Apple's philosophy is different. The font is kind of self-contained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we failed.
Good. This is the last slide we have. There's been a healthy round of questions along the way. We'll be available as well for lunch and afterwards. We're here the whole day. So if you have more questions, David is our contact point here. You might want to talk to him. Are there more questions? Yeah?
So you talk about 80-20 divide, which seems to become a healthy attitude to, instead of making a kitchen sink. That's great. But what if I'm a typesetter and I want, HTML is fine and good, but to me that's somewhat secondary, and I have to write a really, really fine typeset book with micro justification, this and that, and it's not quite there, then what do I do to...
Well, actually, I see that within the 80-20 point. I mean, you say micro justification, maybe optical character bounds and things. I mean, I see that as being part of the implementation, and CSS doesn't really need to do much for that. I mean, we don't need a new property to control micro justification, because the whole point is that the typesetting system should do it. Now, obviously, that takes work on our part. We have to sit down and we have to implement high-quality typesetting, which we want to do, and I think we are heading in that direction. But I actually see that within the 80-20 point. What I see outside the 80-20 point is if you want to do something totally random, like say you're doing a visual poem in which the text flows and moves, and I mean, you're not following any of the conventions of traditional typesetting. Well, then you're almost getting closer to making an image, or perhaps a vector graphic.
And I think we can support that through SVG.
Yeah, we do
have support for SVG in Prince as well. I don't know if we have any
examples of it here.
Yeah. This crown there, the Prince crown, is actually a very simple SVG image. So if you want to do Bostrophodon typography, that we're happy to leave that to SVG. There's several here. Sorry, the first here.
Okay, I just sort of have a question. I mean, like going back to when HTML first came out, and it was sort of like the tool for web authoring. You didn't have CSS yet. We've got font tags for changing the fonts. And
support for presentational attributes and elements.
And then CSS comes around, and they say, okay, great, now we've got something we can describe our style with. Let's just limit our HTML to content. And then someone said, okay, great, forget HTML. Let's look at XML and CSS. And you haven't touched on that yet, and I just wonder where that sits, because it's like, okay, if you've got your style separately now, do you really need HTML? XML is good for specifying content.
Okay, well, HTML was in the topic of this talk, so we haven't touched on the X word, actually. Prince supports XML. I mean, as far as it is possible to support XML, entities, DTDs, X-include, all the XML goodness that you might be interested in is there. Now, of course, there's HTML syntax, and there's HTML elements, the XHTML, the HTML data model. And so you can actually use it either way. You can use HTML, a HTML document, and most of these documents that we've shown are HTML, as in HTML syntax. You can also use XHTML, and you can mix it with other XML vocabularies like MathML and SVG, or your own invented vocabulary, like writing legal contracts. Sometimes people invent their own tags for representing legal contracts as part of a legal contract processing system, and they style it in exactly the same way that you might style HTML. And we fully support that. Now, the long term of HTML, I mean, I don't think the web's going to disappear, the HTML web that we have at the moment. It's going to be around for the long haul, I think. But sometimes for internal use, when you do have XML content and you want to turn it to PDF, we fully support that method.
We actually have within our URL, princexml.com.
It's a giveaway, I guess.
Whereas, most of the content we process is HTML, and I think really the future of the web is in HTML. And I don't know if you want to identify yourself, Ian, but you're right. Ian Nixon is actually editing the HTML5 specification, which will show the path for the future.
Yeah, I had a question about the XML, but on the output. Adobe has this interesting project called Mars.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly interested because they kind of cleaned up a lot of the ugliness regarding encoding.
Yeah, that's
PDF.
Yeah,
And do you
it's horrible.
see yourself supporting the Mars format?
We see ourselves supporting what people ask for, basically. Everyone uses PDF. I mean, of course, we looked at Mars and sort of, oh, yes, wouldn't it have been nice if PDF was this clean from the beginning?
Yeah.
Sadly, it's not, so we're stuck with it, really. Yeah.
There was one.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for people who are writing OCR software? So working with scanned images and want to output the data in some interoperable format? Is this
You know a good interoperable
is HTML
format?
with CSS3 an appropriate format for an OCR program to use? Do you have any recommendations or thoughts or discussions with this community?
So you're saying when you scan a document and you OCR it, what should the output be from the OCR processor? Well, we're not experts going that direction. I have this fascination with the déjà vu format, which is used by the Internet Archive. They scan a book, and they have a low-res image of the background of the text, and then they have a high-res, just monochrome image that they put on top, and then they also do the text as XML. So they have a 3-layer representation of it, which is really cool, I think. But I've basically just been reading this on Slashdot, so I shouldn't claim to be an authority here, but it might be something to look at.
So that the OCR community doesn't really have a dialogue into these standards.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems like an omission.
I agree. And maybe when we generate these PDF documents, we should prepare for people OCRing them in the...
Part of the question is, instead of outputting just vanilla XML content that's just a bunch of text if you look at it, to output something that could functionally reproduce the original page.
Yeah. Yeah.
So another thing I've seen recently on the web that I think could throw a curveball at you guys is a lot of people now are starting to use JavaScript to do like typesetting sort of things, especially for once you get into people who have monitors that are 600 by 800, and then you got other people that are like 2,000 pixels.
Yeah.
And so there's using JavaScript to generate tables that have different numbers of columns, for example.
Yeah. That's unfortunate. In a way, they're reinventing media queries, CSS media queries, where you can query the device and say, apply these style rules if we're on a wide screen, and these style rules if we're on a mobile phone screen. But it sounds like they're querying that with JavaScript, so in a way they're doing it imperatively.
But many of the JavaScripts I've seen, though, are also supporting the CSS syntax, so that they are actually reading CSS.
Oh, right, true.
And implement multi-columns, even if the browser doesn't natively support multi-columns. But they're basing it on the CSS syntax, so the day the browser natively supports multi-columns, then that should work transparently. I think there's going to be some, transition periods, as we call them.
I just sort of wonder how Prince would handle that. Does it have a built-in JavaScript
We
engine?
We don't have JavaScript. The reason we've been considering looking at a subset of JavaScript is document.write, our old friend, yeah. For documents where the content is actually not necessarily dynamically generated, but you do need to go through a layer of JavaScript interpretation to get the whole document. And potentially we could run that as we pass the document, much like a browser. Obviously, interactive dynamic JavaScript is not the first priority for people doing printing, which is why we haven't done it yet. But to support every web page out there, we would need to do it.
Because I've noticed people using it for typesetting issues, I just wondered if that would be supported.
Yeah, well, partly they're compensating for browser development, I guess, but
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Your website says that you can get a free personal license to use Prince XML, but it includes a logo at the top of the first page. Can you show us what that would look like?
This is what the logo looks like. It's only visible on screen in the Acrobat Reader, for example. So when we print this document, it's not going to be shown on the printed page.
So that purple thing in the corner?
Yeah, it's the purple thing in the corner, the little Prince logo. So here's the printed output that doesn't have it.
Right, okay. And how much does it cost to get
If you want it for interactive use, and you don't want that little logo thingy, then it's like $400, is it? 300?
Yeah.
Check the
website.
We're techies.
Check the website.
And then We have another price if you want to build it into your server to generate lots of PDFs on the server side. Then there's a higher price. But we want to make it possible for people to play with this without really paying. That's why we have this. You can use this for your personal documentation, even commercially, as long as you're happy with that little logo up in the corner following the PDF. You can use it for anything you want, as long as you use it interactively. Yeah?
Can you talk a little bit more about your plans, what the issues are for right-to-left languages and for Indic?
Yes.
OK. Well, we've been looking at that recently. Right to left, obviously we need to support BiDi, we need to identify the directionality of Unicode characters, and we need to do the layout and the issues of nesting right to left and left to right text in the one paragraph. So that's primarily just a layout question in the layout engine. I mean, for Arabic specifically, not just BiDi in general, we also need to do the Arabic shaping. The first, middle, and last glyphs look different, and we need to support ligatures and OpenType, all the rules in the OpenType files. So there's that for Arabic. And for Indic, yeah, I mean, I haven't actually put as much effort into studying that one yet. We were planning to implement Arabic first, so Indic is sort of after those, the Indic scripts. But we're not planning to do it differently to the way it's supposed to be done. I mean, what's the scope of the question?
Well, I was just wondering, in terms of like timeline, what sort of levels of investigation you have.
Oh, okay.
Typesetting conventions in the Middle East say that aren't reflected in Western typesetting conventions that you need to address.
Right.
You know, there's styles of justification in Arabic, for instance.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we tend to do this in a fairly agile way, working with our customers who have particular needs. So again, most of our customers are in the US, but most of them often have to support their customers overseas, in China, Japan, wherever. And so we work with them to support what they need. So, we know it's not going to be up to the point of printing the Quran, for example, I mean, which has very specific requirements. But I think we're going to address it on an as-needed basis, really, starting with Arabic. Yeah.
I think the hour is up and people are hungry, so thank you for coming. We enjoyed your questions.
It's been great.